I want to invite my good friend. I've known him for a long time, Zack Pratt. He's a next-gen pastor down at Centerpoint in Orem. Like I said, I've known him for a long time, and he's going to be helping us out preaching today. So let's give him a round of applause. Welcome.
I think this stand was for Spud previously. It was a little short. Oh, sorry. I'm not supposed to do that. Hey, yeah, Mountain View Fellowship. How y'all doing? Good. Yeah, it's 9:30, but you guys are awake and smiling, and it's good. At Centerpoint, we don't do that at 9:30. We're still asleep, so it's good to see you guys. Like you said, my name's Zack Pratt. I am the next-gen pastor down there, so I work with everybody from junior high to our college kiddos, and it's a big job, but I have a lot of people that help me do it. So I'm here with my family today. Megan and Bo are over here, and the other little caveman that lives with us is back in kids ministry. His name's Judah, so if you see him, be ready because he's a one-man wrecking ball. But I'm from Tennessee originally. So if I say things funny or I say them fast, just give me grace. If you need something repeated, just raise your hand and I'll do my best, okay? But a couple things here. God has been teaching me so much. I know a lot of times when you come and guest speak, it's like, hey, just talk about this or this. And Mike was like, just talk about whatever you want to talk about. And Dana said the same thing. I was like, guys, like I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Like just Jesus? That's how we're going to roll today. So I'm excited to be here. Our churches have had a really awesome relationship for a long time, from youth going to camp, from Spud and I just messing around, grabbing coffee and talking about Jesus and fishing and everything else. We've been a part of each other's lives for a long time, and I am so excited to see what's going on over here. It's crazy how much this community's grown, how much you guys have grown, and to see what God's going to do next, I can't wait. So I wanted to talk about just this idea of a new you and a new season. Now, I know your identity isn't going to change as a church, but what you're going to soon realize is that building is going to attract a lot more people to what's going on here, along with a new school and everything else. So the next few years, you guys are in for some crazy change. So I wanted to remind you the new you that you are in Jesus, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Nobody gave me a time limit, so we're going to be here for a couple hours. So just get comfy. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. But I am excited to be here. Are you guys okay if I start with a story? Is that okay? Jesus talked in stories. I think it's okay. So, have you ever been lost before? Like on a road trip, like really, really lost? You try to be. Oh, I like that. Okay, cool. I like that. I don't try to be. Okay, I'm not in that crew. I have this friend named Nick, and Nick is a great guy. Nick goes on adventures. He's a big four-wheeler, and for whatever reason, Nick thinks he knows where he's going all the time. And for whatever reason, I choose to continue to follow him. And it's a point of contention in our relationship, I'm not going to lie. And we've done this multiple times, and now he's shown us some great spots, camping, things like that. But I follow him, and about 2 hours into this trip, we're on a sand, I don't even know if it's a road. And I look at Megan, I'm like, why are we doing this again? Like, why are we still friends with this guy? He keeps, it's not good, okay? So here's the thing. We keep doing it over and over again. We've been on multiple trips, and I'm just like, we're driving in a place we shouldn't drive. The rocks are bigger than our car, and just like, Nick, enough is enough. And so we stopped doing it for a little bit, and then 2 weeks ago, I decided to go with Nick to a youth event. Nick's riding in my truck, and he's like, hey, man, don't worry about the GPS. And I'm like, Nick, I'm gonna worry about it. He's like, no, man, I've been there before. I was just there. And I was like, okay, buddy. So you're gonna tell me where to go, and I'm not gonna use my GPS. He's like, yes. We're driving in the car. He's like, hey, man, you need to turn here. And he's like, nope, not that road. And we keep going down. The next right? Nope, not that road either. That doesn't look right. And we keep going. 4 or 5 times this happens. I have to pull in a cul-de-sac a couple of times and turn around. We finally get to the right road. He's like, it's a house up here on the right. It's a white house. It's beautiful. You're going to know it as soon as you see it. Y'all, I'm not even kidding. We pull into the driveway. It's a brick house. It's not even white. It's not even white. And so I'm not so sure why I do this, but I continue to do this over and over again. Now, I love Nick. Nick, if you're listening, I love you. I just am not going to follow you anymore. But the reality is, in this room, all of us are following something. Every one of us. Okay? Maybe you have a bad friend like Nick that you're following. I hope not. If not, get rid of them and find new friends. But we're all being led by something. We're all being discipled by something. We're all being taught by something or someone. These things we choose to follow can get us lost like a friend without a sense of direction, or worse. And the reality is that we're all being formed by what we follow. That's going to be a tagline today. We're all being formed by what we follow. And all too often, if I'm honest with you, I'm operating on autopilot from my influences and the things that I'm following. Have you heard of memory maps before? I don't know if you have. If you have, it's that thing where you drive somewhere and you don't really know where you're going, but you get there and you're like, how did I get here? did I hit somebody? Is everybody okay? Like, I don't know. Like, and if we're not careful, if we're not intentional, but what we're being formed by, we can live our life on autopilot, just going from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And it's really, really important that I want to highlight our lives and what we're doing every day as a gift to love God and to love people. And if we're not intentional, we just don't do that. We go by everything. And we can be led by news media, by coworkers, even our family of origin, those kinds of things. So as I'm speaking this morning, I would encourage you to reflect on, and in the coming days, of what am I being formed by? And if you and I are not careful, we're not going to have any choice to just be formed by the culture around us. As it's happening in Christianity, in the form of progressive Christianity, which is another word for that is just compromise. So we have to be aware and be awake of what we're doing. So the question isn't whether I'm being formed by something or not. The question is, what am I being formed into? In Jesus' day, and like our day, we're formed by our family and our culture. In Jesus' culture and his closest friends, it was a rabbinic culture. So everything evolved around their rabbinic education system. If you're familiar with that, if not, I'm going to throw a slide up here. The major influence of the Jewish community of the day was the rabbinical education system. This is what every person was formed by and around constantly, whether you were learning in your home or in the school setting. Each community had a school for training students in the Torah. And so Bet Sefer, or the House of the Scroll, was for students. This is like their elementary school. I compared it to, so like elementary school, and it's for guys and girls. Ladies, you're in luck right now. From about 5 to 10 years of age, you're just learning the Torah over and over again. You're memorizing it. Spud, I think we need to hold the youth to a higher standard. They had the Genesis through Exodus. You guys got to start memorizing this stuff. Anyways, that was the expectation. And then, ladies, I'm so sorry. After this, you guys left and you went and practiced what would happen in the home, and you got ready to get married and have babies around 13. That's a bad idea for anybody in this room. So if you're 13, that's just a different culture, different time. Okay, don't you stay away from each other. And so it was like elementary school for them. Now only the best of the best would go on to this next stage called Bet Talmud. Okay, Bet Talmud is the house of learning or instruction. This is for 10 to 13-year-olds. This is where the students would memorize the rest of the scrolls that they had, their oral Bible of the day. And Bet Talmud, there was one more level. Now this is every step is the best of the best of the best, okay? The next one is Bet Midrash. This is where you would learn how to debate and legally handle the Torah. And I know all of this stuff is really boring. I just wanted to incorporate this so you guys understood how formational this was. It was when you woke up, when you went to bed, when you went to school, everything you were talking about is Yahweh, the love for Yahweh, what Yahweh meant to you, how to learn this, and all of this stuff. It's phenomenal. And after Bet Midrash, you would go on and you would be a rabbi or follow a rabbi. This is part of the invitation to be a disciple. The Greek word for disciple is mathetes. You can say it with me. You want to learn Greek? Mathetes. Nice, look at that. It's a welcome to Greek class. So this means you followed behind a rabbi wherever you went. If you were his mathetes, you would learn his dialect, the way he walked, the way he talked, his habits, his language, his cadence. This is how the educational system and life worked in the Jewish community. You were followed and formed by a rabbi. And if you didn't make it to the best of the best of the best, you were followed and formed by your trade, what your mom or dad did in the time. Oh, yeah. Thanks a ton, Zach. Now we're bored and hungry. Sorry. When does this Centerpoint guy get to Jesus? Okay, so I say all that to say, when Jesus starts talking to his disciples, to Simon, Peter, James, et cetera, come follow me, what he's telling them is to come be my mathetes. Come be my disciple. Come follow me as closely as you would follow a rabbi. Now, a different message for a different day would highlight that these guys were educated to a degree, but they didn't make it to the best of the best of the best. They're out there fishing. And Jesus is like, hey, it doesn't matter if you're qualified or not. Just come follow me. Just come follow me. Come be formed by me. And it's as if he's saying, be formed by me and copy the life that I live. Do everything the way I would do it. The old Hebrew beautiful phrase is, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. I know that sounds gross to us because you're like, I don't think that's fun. But that you would follow someone so closely that you would actually be covered in their dust. And that's another word for a disciple, is dust kicker, right? It's a pretty phenomenal thing that you would follow that. And maybe even a better translation for the word disciple is apprentice. Apprentice. Like in our day, if you were learning a trade, you would apprentice under someone. This idea that we should all be formed by in such a way that we apprentice under the life of Jesus. And one person whose life was radically changed by the person of Jesus was the Apostle Paul. Paul goes on from persecuting Jesus followers to be the biggest Jesus follower, the reason why we have most of the New Testament. And if you don't know his story, he got Jesus punched on the road to Damascus. You can read that in Acts 9, phenomenal story. But after Paul met Jesus, he was deeply formed by him. And he went on to write most of the New Testament. One of the letters that circulated around to the churches in Ephesus is what we're going to look at today. He describes this newly formed person, how they should live and how they should act, and it's much different than what most people would expect, especially in our day. Now, Ephesus was a huge city. It was the epicenter of worship for the Greek and Roman gods. Paul spent a significant time there, about 2+ years, and taught about Jesus, and lots of people started following the practice of what we called the way a little bit later, this deeply formed life in Christ. So Ephesians is separated into 2 parts. The first part, chapters 1 through 3, is the gospel story. He's just reviewing what Jesus did. The second part is what we're going to read today, is how we should actually live in that. So 1 through 3, what's happening. 4 through 6, the end of Ephesians, is how do we actually do this? So we're going to take a look here at Ephesians 4, verse 1. If you got a Bible, turn there. If not, I'm sure it'll be right up here for you. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Now, these are really good verses to remember when you're building a building and people disagree on the paint color, just saying. Verse 4, there is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, one Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Paul starts the second section of his letter by reminding them how to behave. A major point here is that he wants them and us to remember their oneness, one body, one Spirit, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God. Lots of ones. We get it, Paul, right? A beautiful reminder that even though they have different backgrounds, stories, ethnicities, the goal is to function as one new thing. One new thing. We're going to keep reading here in verse 17. The new life. Now, this I say and testify to the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. Okay, we're one verse in, we need to stop a little bit. You can read Paul really quickly and miss some of this stuff. It's really good stuff. So Paul is saying you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. Okay, now if you have your Bible, physical Bible, you can flip over just the page before, chapter 3. And who is Paul writing to? He says, I, Paul, am writing on your behalf, Gentiles. So Paul is saying, hey, Gentiles, don't live like Gentiles. And you may be like, well, maybe Paul is just being silly, right? Or not intentional, or subtle, or maybe not so subtle, right? He's saying, don't live the way that you used to live. Gentiles is just an ethnic category for it. That just means non-Jewish people that we would be considered to be Gentiles. And he says, I, Paul, writing to you Gentiles. But Paul, I'm not supposed to act like a Gentile, but I happen to be one. So how does that work? It would be like, hey, stop living like an American, even though you live in America. And you're like, Paul, that don't make no sense, as my people say, right? He isn't dumb. He isn't contradicting himself. What he's saying is that, yes, you are Gentiles, but your identity is not primarily in your ethnic background anymore. You may have been formed by that before, but there's this new way to live. You live your life is not as you did before. This is not who you are anymore. What you are and what you should be formed by is now some other category. You're not to identify by what you formed you previously. He's attacking their very identity. What he's saying is that you were now formed into a new human by Jesus who was made complete in him. You should be formed more by your identity in him than your skin color, your family of origin, the way you vote, past mistakes. You are a new human now. Paul's telling them there's something else. Now, I don't know if you guys have teenagers in the room, but teenagers kind of get to that phase where their parents aren't cool anymore, and I'm not there yet. I really hope I'm not there yet. I don't know. But Judah, our little 3-year-old, when we're playing, we have a good time, and it's fun. But when the big kids come out from our church or group or his school, I'm old news. I am just old news. He's like, Dad, I'm going to go play with those kids now. And so a little bit of my dad heart breaks, and that's fine because it happens. But I wanted to tell you the story of a lady named Crystal Jones. I taught in the inner city in Knoxville for a while. Crystal taught in Atlanta. Now, Crystal worked for this organization, Teach for America. So she taught these kids, low income, a really rough neighborhood, as you can imagine. People who had never been in school before. This school didn't have a kindergarten class. They just went straight from first grade. Some of them didn't know how to hold a pencil. They didn't know how to behave in class. They didn't know what the expectations were. Some of them didn't even know how to hold a book the right way up. So she started this psychology of kids, of how do I get these kids to learn? How do I get them to behave and even listen or do anything? So what she noticed was on the playground, the first graders went out with the third graders. Now, if first graders are third graders, what do they want to be? Third graders. Yeah, first graders see older kids and they're like, I want to be that guy. He's got it all figured out, right? He's got it all together. And so she realized this and started talking to them and teaching them and saying, all right, class, by the end of the year, all of you are going to be third graders. You're going to be able to run faster and read and write because that's what third graders do. And believe it or not, it started working. Okay, she had this expectation. When people would come into her class, she would introduce her class as third graders. Every morning they made this mantra. They called each other Scholar. They would say, oh, your name is not Spud, it's Scholar Spud, right? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Everybody's like, no, don't tell him that. Yeah. So scholar, whatever their name was. And so they would say this every morning. A scholar is someone who lives to learn and is really good at it. You can imagine a kid who's probably been told they're nothing, they have no background or nothing to brag about, that now they are a scholar, someone who lives to learn and is really good at it. She gave them this new identity that you guys are something new now. You're going to be third graders. This is exactly what Paul is doing. Paul is saying that in the churches in Ephesus and to us, there's a new you. You're all third graders now. And we're going to start doing things the way third graders do them. And you're a new human formed in the image of Jesus. And Paul knows and is telling us that real change only comes from a foundation in who God says we are. Our whole self needs to be formed into this new identity. And if you don't feel like it, you need to remind yourself daily because it's who you are in Jesus now. Let's keep reading. Paul's now telling them and us that we're not anymore. Verse 18. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice of every kind of impurity. But that's not the way you learned Christ. Paul is talking about morality here, that we used to be formed by our own ideas, our own worth, our own identity, and that didn't go so well for us, right? Am I the only one who learned a hard lesson going through that stuff? How does this actually take place? How do people become morally calloused? And then just think that it's okay to live life that way. It happens over time. If you've ever played guitar before, you know you have to have calluses on your hands. I haven't played in years, and if I were to do what Mike just did, I would not be happy, right? It would hurt. Paul is saying this is what happens in our mind. When we're unaware by what we're being formed into, we become calloused slowly but surely over time. We become what we give our attention to. As poet Mary Oliver said it like this, attention is the beginning of devotion. And it happens ever so slowly. In our day, we might be watching one news channel, left or right, that is constantly bashing the other political view or ideology or even people. And we consume it so much that we can't even be friends or family with the people on the other side of the aisle. COVID did a number on us with this. We were formed by news, media, social media, isolation. Some people, to the point when they came back to church, they couldn't even come back to church without fear of fear or disunity, and it just consumed them. And what it sounds like when we start living this way is, well, I know my truth, right? I know what's right for me. I can do this on my own. It's just me and Jesus. And it's us not being formed by God that ultimately that we think is best, that we think we know better than His Word, we think we know better than the Christian community we've called to live into and around. And the reality is it's steeped in lies from the enemy. We'll talk more about in a minute. In Romans 8, Paul says it like this, "For to set the mind on flesh is death, but to set the mind on spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God." For it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. It's the process that happens like a slow leak that leads to a flood. We have to remember what we're being formed by. And what we're being formed by is what we follow. These situations always start off with a drift. I've been in ministry long enough that I know if someone's not coming to church, then something else is going on, whether it's shame, guilt, or whatever else. Think about the worst thing you've ever done, okay? We were at a dinner party with our friends the other night, and one of our buddies said, hey, what's the worst thing you've ever done? I'm like, dude, what? This is not conversation we have with other people. Like, we could do this one-on-one, but so you don't answer it out loud. Everyone's like, the worst thing you've ever done, I bet it didn't happen in a Bible study. I bet it didn't happen when you were grabbing coffee with your pastor or a close friend, okay? It happened when you were alone, guaranteed. We're at our most vulnerable when when we're separated from the body of believers here, right? It started in the first pages of the Bible. The enemy got Eve alone and isolated her and then tempted her, and then she gave in. Let's keep reading. Verse 21. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed by the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God, in true righteousness and holiness. Paul is giving us the good old Baptist 3 things here that we should be taught and live by as someone being formed in Christ. The first one is put off your old self. No more old you, just new you. You've heard about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and you taught to take off your old identity. Paul's using this language here like it's taking off a coat, taking off a shirt. You're actually getting rid of it, and you're going to replace it with something else. All the things that formed your life before are now old news. Paul is talking about it like you're getting rid of it, completely rid of it. And you're like, okay, easier said than done, Paul. That's great. And he's asking us to take it off because we're still being influenced by it. He says deceitful desires is the phrase he uses. Now, we as created beings have these desires, and they're not all bad. Some of the desires we have are really, really good. Desire for a relationship, right? Desire to be known by another person. Desire to have basic needs met or cared for. A desire to have a job that we have fulfillment in. Those are not bad desires. But under the old humanity, being formed by our flesh, the old self is where even good desires can trick us. Because when we're in our old self, we believe that desires are the end in of themselves. If I could just have that girl, if I could just have that job, if I could just have that financial freedom or that car or that whatever, then maybe I would feel fulfilled. They're deceitful. They're deceiving us that we could somehow find hope or a foundation in those things. I would be worth something if I could just fill in the blank. Paul would say that that's the old self buying into the false foundation that is stuff and consumerism. Even if you could obtain every desire you have, you would never get what you're looking for. They only have a bigger hole that you need to fill with the next best thing and the next best thing and the next deceitful desire. They form in us a fake identity, a false meaning of worth. And when we're formed by those evil desires, they are corrupting us. The old self is in control when we're living in that. So, he goes on to say the new way of living is consistently renewing your mind. Now, this is the hard part. You can take off old stuff. That's not hard. The renewing of your mind is really, really difficult. And this is what God's working in me right now and convicting me of. We all have different ways to think about ourselves. Most of that comes from your family of origin, good, bad, or indifferent. How you were raised, of how do I find worth, how do I get attention, how do I get love. And some of you had terrible situations growing up, and for that I'm so sorry. But it forms how we think about ourselves, the community that's around you, for what worth you have. So what Paul is saying, if we're being formed by Jesus, then we have to work on what's between our ears first, that we take off that, we work right here between our ears. It's what shapes us. It's what controls our day, our decisions, how we see ourselves, how we see others. The news, social media, all those things that shape us. The average American right now watches a screen for about 5 to 6 hours a day. That adds up to like a decade of your life, okay? Guilty as charged. I'm not like pointing fingers. This is all like to me, right? The average millennial spends about 2,800 hours consuming digital content a year. So how can we renew our mind when this is what we're being fed all the time? How are we to rebuild our view of ourselves and of God and of people if we're hiding behind a screen all day, every day? Unfortunately, our minds are too flooded to believe that most of the day. Our minds are too flooded to believe that God actually cares about us, that he actually loves us, that he actually is proud of us, he actually desires a relationship with us. We must replace how we think we get love and acceptance to how we actually do. That's resting and abiding in the finished work of Jesus. His love is so permanent for people who are so screwed up. And this is the gospel message of Jesus, means that we used to live in a way, and we used to think about ourselves, and that is not who we are anymore. The things that used to form us are taken care of by God's sacrificial love for you. And the renewal of our mind does not happen in a day, but it happens over this journey. No matter where you are on that journey of Jesus, this is your first time at this church, or you've been a Christian since you were 3, right? Like, it takes time. Taking off the old self, you could do that in a couple weeks. Renewing your mind, there goes 30 years. Paul says again in Romans 12, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So how do we combat these lies that the world feeds us? We get into the Word. We get into the truth. We stay close to community even when we don't want to. John Mark Comer in his book, Live No Lies, says this: we must take great care to fill our minds with truth rather than the opinions and unedited endless stream of unreality. Okay. The last thing Paul gives us here is to put on a new self. Take off the old, renew your mind, put on the new. Because you were created in God's image to be set apart. This means to start living out God's love, his set-apartness, his righteousness to those around you, to start living to this community. I mean, come on, this church is amazing. These people are amazing. What an opportunity for you to live that out. Your transformed self, as you daily put off your old self, pick up your new self, renew your mind, and live a life following and being formed by your Rabbi, Jesus. Now, Mountain View Church, I don't know where you're at today. I don't know how you feel about yourself. I don't know if any of this clicked with you, but the words of Paul have never been more true of things that we just as Christians should do. Put off our old self, renew our mind, put on our new self. Jesus completes the picture of the perfect human. He lived a life we couldn't live, paid a price we couldn't pay, and this truth forms new meaning and new life, and it should take a hold of our soul and our spirit and how we do everything. Paul is declaring that if you're a follower of Jesus, you should be and are being formed by him. And what's being formed by him is formed in you, a new you. What is true about him is now true about you. You are saved because of what he did on your behalf. And this demands a new life. This demands a new response. This demands a new worldview. Hebrews says it like this: for by a single offering he has made perfect for all time those who are being sanctified. My prayer for you, as you take time to see what's forming you, that you take off the old untruths the world has tried to convince you of, that you allow the truth of the cross to renew your thinking, and to live in a way that this community has never seen before, full of confidence in the finished work of Jesus, the new you. Would you pray with me as the band comes up? God, you're so good. Thank you for your word. Thank you for this ancient letter to the churches in Ephesus. God, that it was written to them, but for us as well. And God, what a lesson to learn of the things that a lot of times we think we don't need to do anything, God. And I pray you help us. What a struggle it is to renew our minds, to even focus on you for more than 30 minutes on a Sunday. God, would you take away the distractions in this room right now? Would you take away all the negative voices that the enemy's trying to convince us that we're not good enough, that we need to keep on keeping on, keep trying on our own, keep settling for less, God? Help us realize that we're formed by what we follow. And God, we so desperately want to follow you. Would you help us get all the distractions out of the way, that we can accept your love? God, forgive us of our unbelief. Sometimes it feels too good to be true. God, help us live a life worthy of the calling that you've given us. Jesus, we love you. And we trust you. Thank you for this place and these people. We pray this in your name because there's power in your name. Amen.